All right. So apparently I was rambling not live for a good 8 minutes. So that's awkward. Well, I guess I'll just start from scratch here. Sorry about that, folks. Um, it's been about a year since I streamed to YouTube, and I seem to recall, and I probably was just wrong, that last time when I just started streaming, it would start the stream automatically. So, my bad. We're gonna take that one from the top. All right, so what's up, everybody? This is Ryan here, and you're watching uh, basically my first live Q&A in over a year. I can't even actually remember the last time I did one of these, just a Q&A specifically. So, yeah, that was awkward. So I started streaming. I use OBS Studio for streaming, and I hit the start streaming button, and I'm like looking at the YouTube console, and it's like excellent connection. There's a preview, and I forgot to hit the go live button because I forgot that you actually have to hit that. So I just sat here for like 8 minutes talking to nobody except myself, which, well, at least it was a good conversation. But yeah, welcome back, everybody. So let me just get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. So firstly, there was an Android Worldwide event, which occurred yesterday. A lot of great talks. Particularly, I was interested in like the last four, which had a lot of talks on Compose and some topics in Compose, which I'm particularly interested in. Performance being a big one, and then also navigation. And I did end up posting the last talk, which was by Pavlo Stavitsky. And his was quite an interesting talk because one of the client apps that I'm working on, or one of the apps for one of our clients at my current company, we're kind of in a little bit of a transitional phase. Like, we're still mostly using XML, but we are trying to do as many new things as possible in Compose. And one of the tricky things about migrating basically a Compose application, a fragment-based XML application to Compose is navigation. And hey, what's up, Carlos? So yeah, I found that to be a really awesome talk, and I suggest people watching go check out Android Worldwide's YouTube channel. Eventually, these talks will be posted. So yeah. And the only other bit of housekeeping I can think of at the moment, anyways, is that so how this is going to work is on Wednesdays I'm going to be doing this Q&A session where I just focus on answering questions. I don't have any lesson prepared for today. And then on Mondays I'll be on Twitch, and in that case I will be focused specifically on a lesson. Probably most of the time I'll have like 30 to 15 minutes of Q&A time left on those days, but if there's no questions I'll kind of just end the stream there. And then I will be basically uploading the lesson to YouTube with some light editing. And that's the plan for my current model. The reason why this happened is I was all excited to be streaming to both YouTube and Twitch at the same time, because I've been wanting to get started on Twitch for quite a long time, because YouTube Live it's difficult for me to explain, but basically I would just say that YouTube really treats live streaming like an afterthought, whereas on Twitch it's sort of the primary deal with Twitch. And so I've been wanting to sort of transition over to Twitch, and I thought, well, why don't we try and get the best of both worlds and stream to both Twitch and YouTube? And sure enough, that's against the Twitch terms of service. So I even like paid for this software service to simulcast between the two of them, and I thought it was a little bit shady that this service at no point mentioned that you can't actually stream to Twitch and YouTube, but it is what it is. They got 1 month of subscription out of me anyways before I cancel it. So I see we have a few viewers right now. For those who've been watching my channel for a long time, you probably know how this works, but if you're new here, pretty much ask me any question about being a programmer and stuff like that. I'm a professional software developer. I currently am a mobile developer, so I still mostly do Android work, but I do a little bit of work on the iOS applications. And yeah, the reason I do this is because when I was a random nobody programmer, teaching myself to code and trying to build my own apps starting in 2014, I didn't really have anybody I could ask questions to. So this is actually the reason I do this. Is I don't care if you're like some 16-year-old in Sri Lanka or something, or you're, you know, a seasoned Android developer in San Francisco, or something like that. I'm happy to answer your question. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'll wait just a moment here, and then if we don't get any questions, I did have one sent in on X or Twitter or that app that I don't know what to call it anymore. So I can go ahead and answer that. But yeah, it's good to be back. All right, well, I think I will go ahead and answer that question then. So a friend of mine, Hardik, asked, hey Ryan, I've got an interview coming up for an Android internship. I've done Android in the past, but it's been about 8 months. I basically got a web dev internship, started learning it more and more. Anyways, now I have to prepare for the interview. What do you think are things I should focus on? I have a feeling that Florian Walter, who you may know as Coding and Flow, would probably tell this person, just don't even do the Android internship, just stick with web dev. But I'll try to give you some help here. It's kind of a long-term joke that he quit Android development and went to web dev. All right. So in order to answer this question, I have some kind of good news and bad news, and I've made up off the top of my head, hopefully, a somewhat interesting way of answering the question, which is, so of course it's going to be, it depends, but prepare for these kinds of interviewers. And when I say interviewers, I'm talking about, this could be like company, hiring team, company, or hiring team policy. So basically what this means here is I've been through probably at this point about 25 Android interviews. Now, it's not the case that every interview was with a different company. Some companies will put you through multiple interviews. That's pretty common. I've been through interviews at Slack. I've been through interviews at Meta, multiple interviews. So, but collectively, this is sort of my experience that I can share with you. And the annoying thing is that I can't actually give you super clear, a small list of things you should study, except for a couple which I will mention. But overall, it depends a lot on the hiring team, the company's hiring policy, or the specific interviewer you're dealing with. So there's a couple different kind of interviews that you want to prepare for. So there's a tech screen interview, and this is generally going to be by someone in, I'm trying to think of, I'm going to use the term HR, human resources, slash, what's the, whatever, talent acquisition. Let me just list out the different things, and we'll talk about how you can prepare for each of these things, because they're going to be totally different. Somebody says, is passing a float or an int into a composable acceptable, or should we pass int unit to avoid unnecessary composition? So the answer, Buttery, is it depends. It really depends. But that's a good question. You should watch Android Worldwide's live streams. There's a couple talks on Compose. So So we've got the tech screen interview. We've got the DSA nerd interview. And when I say nerd, I mean that term endearingly. I am very much a nerd. And this is generally going to be with engineers. And this is common in Mang or whatever. Meta, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Wow, I can't believe I actually remember that off the top of my head. What else do you have? You've got the Jeopardy interview. I'll explain what that is. And this is going to be generally with, I'll say, developers. And then you've got like the what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to call this one my favorite kind of interview. So let's break each of these down really quickly. So for the tech screen interview, this is generally going to be given by someone who is not a developer. And for these sorts of interviews, honestly, the most important thing for you to do is to get along with these people because they tend to be quite social. I won't say actually lucky is not the term. I worked really hard to learn how to talk to people, but I did sales for a lot of years, and I've been doing a ton of interacting with people online, so I tend to be really quite good at tech screen interviews. I also have been doing Android since 2014, so the questions they tend to ask are like sort of pretty basic. What's the difference between a list view and a recycler view, for example? And you can generally give like just a quick basic answer. And as long as you're somewhat familiar with Android development, you should get most of those questions correctly. So yeah, like I say, for the tech screen type interview or the HR type interview, just try to get along with people. Be prepared to explain your past experience, your projects. And that's pretty much it, actually. Let's maybe write that down. So generally, we'll have some basic questions, usually to do with front end or concurrency. So they'll often ask you a question like something to do with user interface. A very, very common one is list view versus recycler view. What would happen if you were to like make some long running call on the main thread or something like that. You've got the DSA nerd interview. And so this is, to me, the dumbest and most obnoxious form of interview you'll get. And this is very common in like Meta, for example. And I know Google does this a lot as well. But I have had these sorts of questions pop up in smaller companies. So it does happen. But these are going to be the questions like write a merge sort on a whiteboard. And I find these sorts of interviews just really stupid. It's basically like it's judging you based on how good you are at memorizing implementations and doing arithmetic quickly, which are things that I'm just not naturally very good at. And if you want to get good at these sorts of things and you're like me, you have to practice 4 months like I did. I did end up making it to the final round with Meta, so I did have to pass a couple interviews which had these sorts of questions. But for me, to prepare for this kind of thing, implement all basic, I shouldn't say implement, let's say some basic data structures. So be able to build your own linked list, hash map. Those are the two. Oh yeah, you'll probably stack/queue. You'll probably need that as well. These are the sorts of things you're going to need to do. And then solve a ton of DSA questions. Read, what's it called? Hacking the Code interview. It's the book by Gail. I'm probably butchering her name, but Gail McDowell. Cracking the code interview, I think it's called, which I believe you can find for free online. It's always good to support people, so I encourage you to buy the book. But yeah, you're going to want to read that book, and it'll help you quite a bit. You've got the Jeopardy interview, so this one is fun. Basically, you will be asked a whole bunch of specific questions. So in this style of interview, you're just going to be bombarded with questions about Android of varying difficulties, like common things you could be asked. Again, you could be asked what's the difference between using a list view and a recycler view. You could be asked how do you start a foreground service? How do you show a notification? Yeah, a lot of stuff like that. Very trivia based. For these ones to prepare for, you really just have to do a ton of... You have to kind of know your Android stuff, and this can be pretty difficult. I generally do okay in these interviews because I've been doing Android since 2014 and I've built a lot of applications. I'm not a person who will spend a ton of time memorizing things, so I kind of have to use the things that I've learned through building applications as opposed to like going through the documentation and memorizing things. I never do that because it doesn't work very well for me. And then the last kind of interview, which is my favorite kind of interview, at my most recent position, or my most recent job, I actually deeply enjoyed the interview process with this company, my company. And the reason why is I had been pretty used to getting sort of like DSA nerd interviews, and then the odd Jeopardy interview. And then when I came to this company and did the interview, they asked me questions which were not like, how can I explain this? We're not about like how much crap can you memorize or how quickly can you solve a DSA problem, which is not going to be relevant to you in your career. It was like, how do you approach things? Like, I can't give you the specific questions because that would undermine their selection process, but how do you, what would be an example? Like, how do you go about choosing an architecture? Would be one example. Questions where they're asking me sort of like at a meta level, and I don't mean the company, I mean the English language word meta, like above, how I'm thinking about solving problems. And that's where I tend to really shine because I've been doing this for a really long time, and I tend to, that's just how my brain works pretty well. I think about these sorts of things a lot. So, Wojtek Kalaczynski says, the DSA interview that I know from Google is what you're describing now. Oh, interesting. But I have to say, do they still force you to do like whiteboard, like do merge sort on a whiteboard type things? That would be my question to you. Wait a minute, I know who you are, Wojtek Kalaczynski. Do you still, are you still working at, you're still at Google? No, you're ex-DevRel. Cool, oh, okay, good. Wojtek, I've known who you are since like 2016 or something like that. Oh, okay. So yeah, it's really, really cool to see you show up. You know, while you're here, I'd love to, if you've got a second, I'd love to bug you about this. So I never actually went through the interview process with Google. I did go through all the way up to the last step with Meta. And my impression was pretty negative about the Meta interview process because obviously they have the different kinds of interviews, but I felt like their primary emphasis was on like literally just how good are you at memorizing things and solving problems really quickly, as opposed to like, how do you think about these problems and can you create a good solution? So it's kind of nice to hear that maybe at Google it's a little bit different. Anyways, thank you for stopping by. I thought I recognized that name. It's very, very Polish name. Technically my real last name is Radlinski. That's true. It probably depends on the interviewer. So anyways, yeah, my favorite kind of interview and what I got at my most recent company was questions like, how do you reason about problems? And that's what I loved, because to me, you can get a person who's just naturally or through a lot of hard work really good at memorizing things or really good at solving problems in DSA quickly, but that is almost certainly not the kind of person who you're going to want eventually in a senior developer role. Let me rephrase how I said that. You can get a person who is good at those things and also good at decision making. But if you're looking for someone who down the road could end up in like a more senior role, you're going to want someone who can reason about things and make balanced decisions. And really what it comes down to, and this is kind of a long running joke, is the answer to every question according to a senior developer is, it depends. And this is a joke, but it's also kind of true. I can pick just about anything. I tend to really enjoy doing software architecture, and I'll constantly get asked, what is the best architecture? Is it MVI? Is it MVVM? And the answer is always, it depends on the project requirements. In the same sense that the ideal architecture for a hospital is probably not going to be the ideal architecture for a small one-floor house. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that kind of interview. So, anyways, let me just do a couple more things for Android developers, which are good to know and come up a lot. Have a handle. Let's just do some general tips here. Have a handle on activity and fragment lifecycle. And yes, I do realize that we're all doing compose now, or actually some percentage of us are doing compose, although a lot of us are still actually doing activity fragments, XML view system in existing applications. But have a handle on the activity and fragment lifecycle. So I'm not saying that you should know these things by heart and literally know every one of them. I certainly don't, and I've been doing Android since 2014. But you should have a handle on the basics, like on create, maybe on view created in fragments, on stop, on pause, on destroy maybe, on start, on resume. Those, as long as you know roughly the order those are called, and maybe the situation when something might be persisted or recreated, then that would be useful information. Have a good day.
I love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye. My partner's going to work. So yeah, have a handle on activity and fragment lifecycle stuff. Honestly, the most common question I'm asked actually is explain the difference between a list view and a recycler view. And there's like the really basic answer to that, which is that the recycler view has the view holder pattern implemented inside of it, baked inside of it, whereas the list view doesn't. But if you want to get like really fancy, you could say that you could also just implement the view holder pattern in the list view is also a good answer. What would be some other things? So just know how to do concurrency. So, you know, background work with something. I don't care if it's Java executors or Kotlin coroutines, RxJava, coroutines and flows, just know some way to do this. Async task used to be a valid answer here, but async task, as far as I know, is deprecated now, so probably not the best choice. And you can do threads, like Java Thread API. I personally find it's just a little bit low level, but if, I'd rather you know how to do that than not. And then, so either / both of know how to store data locally. I should say store / retrieve. And or remotely. So basically what I'm saying here is this could be, probably we're thinking like a database. It could be shared prefs / data store, or it could even be Java file IO. Probably you want to go with a database and shared prefs, but knowing how to use Java file IO, that's one way. And then here we're talking about like REST, Firestore, maybe KTOR client, something like that. Your best bet is REST with retrofit. It's just the most common thing. So yeah, these are like the general tips I can give you, and hopefully rambling about all the different types of interviews that you're going to get was useful. Are there any other questions? Yeah, that was cool. I did not expect Wojtek Kalaczynski here. Any other questions? Or do I have to ask my own questions, which would be like super awkward? Stay hydrated, everybody. That's okay, I can wait. I got time. Maybe I'll just ramble about some cool things that I saw from Android Worldwide until I get a question. So one of the talks I watched was on Compose Performance by Yuri Perez. And that was a really cool talk. I got a couple takeaways from it. Yeah, that I really enjoyed Yuri's talk, and I had a couple useful takeaways from it. So the first one being, let's see if I can remember these in order. I don't think I will be able to, but one of them was so using derived state of for basically computed variables. This was a cool one. So in the situation where, let's say you have some variable like a Boolean flag, and you want to be able to flip that thing based on some kind of computation, but you don't want that to be reevaluated, causing unnecessary compositions over and over again. Derived state of is a useful solution for that. And then another one I learned from his talk was if you're using like lists and grids, use the key property to increase efficiency. So let's say you're using like a list as, for example, similar to like a recycler view or just a list of items, and there may need to be modifications to that list. Apparently, if you use the key for each item, then that will help the Compose compiler figure out how best to handle recompositions. And then I think one of the other things that was really just useful from his talk is like having a good, large mental model of the stages of Compose. So the stages, if I can remember them properly, there's the composition stage, the layout stage, and then the draw stage. And I'm not actually sure if these are terms he came up with or if these are like the standard terms. But it was useful to get kind of a mental model from his talk. So we have a question from Simon. That's a fun question. This will probably be the last question I ask because I start. Well, I've got 20 more minutes, and I can probably ramble for another 20 minutes. Simon asks, last time I was on your channel, you were job hunting. How are you finally able to hack the job market? That's a fun question. I mean, honestly, so I will be uploading a video shortly, which is the live lesson I gave on Twitch, which kind of answers exactly this question. But I'll reiterate basically the main points here, which is volume is key. So I sent out a ton of applications. I prepared really hard for months for a Meta interview. I should say a Meta virtual on-site interview. That's actually, I think, what they call it. And so preparing for that one basically prepared me for any kind of interview I'll ever get, because I literally spent like months just doing DSA stuff. So that, and honestly, like I don't think I'll ever go through an interview process more difficult than what I did at Meta, because having a whole day of really difficult interviews was tricky. Obviously, I didn't get the job, and I'm actually quite happy because everyone I spoke to there as a developer had a crappy work-life balance, so I wasn't actually that bummed out. And then 2 weeks after I got the rejection letter, I was still sending out job applications, and I passed an interview and I got a job. So it happened shortly after that period of my life. So yeah, send out a ton of applications. That's really the biggest tip I can give you, Simon, is apply to a ton of places and treat the interview as something that you can gain experience with. That's really what I suggest for you. Interviewing is a skill, and every time you do an interview, note the things you did well and don't beat yourself up. I tend to be quite self-critical, so I had to learn not to be. But anything you screwed up on the interview, if it was a question, if you did poorly on a coding challenge, unless it was a really ridiculous coding challenge or question, go back afterwards once you've, recovered a little bit emotionally and solve that problem or answer that question so that the next time you run into that thing, it's not going to be an issue for you. And in doing a large number of interviews, you're going to get more comfortable doing interviews. You're going to know where your weak points are. And that's the main thing I suggest for you. And then apart from that, it's just luck and high volume. I see all of a sudden we have boom, a whole bunch of questions. So let me go through these pretty quickly. So one dev asks, why did you stop producing Android lessons? So there's a couple reasons. One of the main ones is I just wasn't making any money, and The other reason is that in order to do well at YouTube, you either need to be an incredibly interesting person and have things going on outside of your life, like being a great example would be Devin Larratt, the arm wrestlers channel. Devin Larratt is the most famous arm wrestler on the planet, and he has almost 1 million subscribers, and he does like almost zero editing. He does terrible videos on his crappy little phone, and yet like he has a huge following. That's because he's an extraordinary person and he's at the top of his field. The other approach to being successful at YouTube is being really good at editing and social media and all these sorts of things, which I don't really care much about. I'd really rather just teach people and focus on the quality of content. And that model just doesn't work very well for YouTube. And then the other answer, the reason why I'm not doing it now is take, for example, Philip Lackner. Philip Lackner makes extraordinarily good Android content. Like, to be honest, I don't even really want to compete with him. He's got good quality videos, good content, and when I see, what I'm trying to say here is like I'm not really interested anymore in just being an Android developer and being an Android guru. I'm just, yeah, long term, there's a lot more I want to do with this channel. And then a big part is just that I wasn't making any money. Oh yeah, and final point being, I don't have time. I work full-time as an Android developer now, so I don't actually have time to really do a lot of that stuff. Alfred says, am I limiting myself by only applying to remote positions? I don't know. I only applied... No, that's not true. I did apply to some local positions, but it's hard to say, Alfred. The thing about it is, like, if you really would prefer a remote position, then I don't think there's anything wrong with being picky if you can afford that. I basically never want to work a on-site position again in my life. I love remote work, so I'm not going to tell you that you're limiting yourself, but I guess technically you are. Ali says, do you have live streams planned for beginners who want to get into Android development? Possibly. I do want to get back into building apps live, but I don't really have enough time to do that right now. I can pretty much just do these Q&As and a couple lessons here and there, but I don't have a lot of time for the reason that I work full-time already. Congrats to Alfred on buying a house. What is your current city? Wojtek asks, you talked about interviews from the interviewee side. Do you yourself interview others? And what kind of questions give you the best signals or most information about the candidate? So to be 100% honest, no, I haven't been involved in hiring processes at the companies that I have worked for. I'll still try to answer how I would approach this. And it would be more as we talked about before, it would be a lot more like how do you think about problems? So what would be some questions that I would ask? The kind of thing I would like to ask, like, when would you prefer a linked list over an array? So here I have to kind of explain it to the audience, to the beginners here. I realize this could be pretty redundant to the person who's asking the question, but this would be a great example of, like, I actually do want to know if you have some basic software engineering skills, and depending on how this question is answered, I feel like I could get those answers. Like, it could be, I have no idea. It could be, linked list is better for when you need to insert elements in the middle. It's more efficient, or something like that. I could get like a real hyper nerd who would explain that an array is supposed to be contiguous memory space, but actually the physical memory space might not be contiguous. So this would be the kind of question I'd love to ask, because it's really up to the interviewee to sort of explain how much depth they want to go into it. As far as I feel like a great question would be, if you had to choose between compose or XML / let's just say view system. Compose or view system for a new project, what would what's I'm trying to think of how to speak English here. What things would you consider in making that decision? So that could be one. If I was interviewing someone who I expected to be more senior, I might follow up by asking, so if you are working on an existing code base which uses view system, what things would you consider in migrating to compose? So the overarching theme would be these sorts of questions, which it's kind of up to the interviewee to pretty much share with me their whole thought process. I don't know if this would be the best way to do an interview, though, because one thing I always am careful about is if I'm talking about something that I don't have a ton of experience with, i.e. interviewing other people, I don't know. I feel like I would need to go through the process along for a while and start to refine that process and the questions that I'm asking. But I think that's generally what I would go for. I wouldn't ask them brain teasers. I think that's the dumbest, stupidest kind of thing ever. I wouldn't ask them to, write Dijkstra's algorithm on a whiteboard. And then I guess a lot of it, now I'm getting really nitpicky, but a lot of it would also depend on what sort of level that I'm interviewing at. I might make things like a little bit easier or more complicated based on that. Wojtek, I'm guessing you have done quite a bit of interviewing, or maybe that's false, but do you have any feedback for me? Is there anything that you would suggest or things that I could improve upon there? Hey, what's up, Prenchel? And just FYI, I have a hard stop in about 8 minutes because I am actually doing this before work. Wojtek says, +1 to questions that provoke a discussion. Hey, what's up, Edwin? So yeah, I've got 8 minutes left. So Wojtek says, the thing people need to understand is no one expects a correct yes or no answer. Yeah. It's very... there's not a lot of questions that can be answered in that way. One thing that happens all of the time when I've been doing these live streams since 2017, although I did take a year off, but I'm constantly asked, what is the best architecture? What is the best library for this? And the answer I give people all the time now is it depends. And then I try to obviously give them some useful information beyond just saying it depends, but there's no such thing as the best language. It depends on what you're trying to do. Question from Pink Kitty. Is it harder? I should try and rate I'll rate them here. Pink Kitty, is it harder to get a job as a software engineer in 2023? If I'm being like a real logical nerd here, You haven't really given me anything to compare to. I'm guessing you mean the past. I don't know. I got hired. Would I say it's a more difficult job market than it was maybe 5 years ago? Almost certainly. There was a lot of layoffs, and there's been an economic recession, so that means there's more competition and fewer jobs. But if you're going to use that as an excuse to not apply to dozens and dozens of jobs, then it's on you. At the end of the day, you need to apply to as many jobs as possible and go through as many interviews as possible and create as many opportunities for success as possible. That's how I did it. It was through hard work. I actually got laid off from my previous job, and when I say I got laid off, the whole mobile team got laid off, so I wasn't personally at fault. And 2 days, within 48 hours of me being laid off, I had already sent out 8 job applications. So, volume. Lots of applications. Practice. Roger, probably trying to be a little bit funny, asks, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm thinking of a Family Guy joke that I won't repeat here, but where do I see myself in 5 years? Doing live coding full-time and building things a little bit on the side, but mostly interacting and teaching with people full-time. What is your biggest weakness? I am hyper-obsessive, and what that means is sometimes I will get stuck in a problem and a particular solution and be unable to take a different approach. So I've taken a lot of steps recently to just make sure that if I'm beating my head against the wall for too long, maybe I need to choose a different part of the wall to beat my head against. Why should I hire you? I don't care. If it seems like a good value proposition to hire me, then hire me. If it doesn't, then have a nice day. Thank you, Roger. I appreciate that. All right, I've got 4 minutes. But yeah, cool. I'm glad towards the end here that we got a couple viewers and some questions. One dev says, I see you're on Windows 10. It pleases, and then I often hear how those same programmers praise their MacBooks. Yeah, I actually have M2 32 gig, so for work I do use a MacBook Pro. It's actually annoying using like a Windows desktop and then the MacBook because I get so used to like Mac shortcut keys and then I have to switch back and I keep hitting like Alt-C to try and copy things on Windows and vice versa. In 5 years' time, what would software engineer jobs look like with rapid development of AI? I like Don Felker's sort of idea, which is that more and more we're going to become software orchestrators as opposed to like software developers. I still think we've got a couple years, possibly even like 5 years, where it's still going to be useful to actually know how to write code. But over time, let's be realistic here. The better and better AI or, whatever language learning models or whatever you want to call them get at solving problems with less and less input for us, the less and less we're going to need to do. But I think we're in kind of an awkward transitional phase where we've got ChatGPT that can, if you know how to use it properly and know what it can and can't do, can help you be more productive. And if you don't know what you're doing, then it can write some really terrible code. So I think we're in the awkward transitional phase right now. Roger says, even though you don't have much time anymore, I think an interesting topic would be career progression cap as a front-end mobile dev. Oh, Can't speak English. What exactly do you mean by a cap there? You mean like limit? Oh, I love coffee. Oh, I've got 1 minute left. So I just want to say to everyone watching, so I will continue to do these live Q&As on Wednesdays on YouTube. On Mondays, I will be streaming on Twitch. And in that case, I'll be doing like a lesson, a scripted lesson. I've already done one of those, and so I think Twitch has like a 48-hour period where I can't re-upload to YouTube. But I will upload that lesson to YouTube shortly. That lesson was basically an explanation of how I got hired in one of the most difficult job markets for an Android developer or a mobile developer. So, yeah. Anyways, unfortunately, people, I have to start work in 30 minutes, and I've got a couple things I need to do before that. Thank you so much for joining me and listening. And yeah, I hope you all have a good day. And I hope you will join me next Wednesday. And if there is a, if there's enough interest, I can start doing these Q&A sessions on Fridays as well. Weekends is not going to happen because that is my time to hang out with my beautiful partner. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Follow me on X. And and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a good place to connect. And yeah, have a good day. Do widzenia.